It's a great pleasure to be here in this meeting of the Association of European Schools of Planning. And I would like to contribute to it with this topic, cities in a post-utopian world. Let's resume the presentation. So the two topics, where are we, Anthropocene or Utopiocene? So this is a concept I will try to explain to you, what I mean by Utopiocene. And the second one will deal more directly with cities, how cities are in condition or not, what they need to do in order to face this new period of human history that I'm calling Utopiocene. So this is a very known quotation. I'm sure that all of you already read or saw this quotation from Paul Crutzen about the new geological epoch we are in, Anthropocene. And as you may see, basically what Crutzen and the colleagues are saying is that the changes that were introduced in our planet, in all the spheres of our planet, from lithosphere to atmosphere, cryosphere, biosphere, all those changes are noticeable. And they started at least after the Industrial Revolution, in the middle of the 18th century. So that's something that is being discussed in the International Geological Society. But what I'm trying to propose you is another name for the period we are living in, because I think that Anthropocene is a rather descriptive. It's a description. It's not an explanatory concept, and I think that probably the concept of Utopiocene will be better suited to understand that. So our time is characterized by speed in every domains of our collective life. They are triggered, the speed is triggered by technological improvement in every areas. That's why population, GDP, and many other indicators are growing in an exponential scale. As you may see in the information in the slide, there was a great acceleration after the Second World War. And the exponential lines are very clear after that. What are the reasons for that? We know the reasons, but do we know well in terms of understanding critically what is happening? We know the negative side effects. We know the positive, of course. We use every day the positive, the light, the bright sides of technological improvement, that's for sure. But we know also that there are dark sides, negative, dark impacts, and those impacts are not, we should not neglect those impacts. The example of the RLC, so there was enough self-confidence to shift a sea, one of the great Earth seas, and it was, in some decades, the sea was transformed in a political and ecological tragedy. But the case of China, the Three Gorges Dam, is something that is far from being completely understood, and we know for sure that, for instance, biological diversity was affected. This dolphin that you may see in the slide disappeared in 2008. And there was also a great human burden in terms of costs. Over 1 million of people were dislocated on account of the building of the dam. And even in highly organized countries like Japan, the tragedy of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster was possible. It was a natural disaster, it was a tsunami, but it was a natural disaster that was increased exponentially by human decisions, human mistakes. It was the perfect storm, the combination of an earthquake, a 1,000-year tsunami, and political arrogance. The result was at the start, 18,000 dead people. I don't know if you are aware that in Fukushima there was a wall, because everybody knew that tsunamis were possible. There was a wall of 5 meters high. So a good example of arrogance in this process. And if we go to a global scale, climate change is the name for the danger we are facing. It's not a natural climate change, it's an anthropogenic climate change. It has to do with our way of life, the way we deal with production, with mobility, with the way we move ourselves from a place to another. That's the reason for climate change today. James Hansen, probably the most famous scientist in the field, speaks about the Venus syndrome. So we are shaping our Earth in a kind of new Venus, new planet Venus. He worked in AESA, so he knows very well about the atmosphere of Venus. This is a slide from a project called Planetary Boundaries. Probably many of you are familiar with the project. And as you may see, it's a kind of red lights and green lights. In many boundaries, ecological boundaries of our planet, we are already in the red light. So in biological diversity, in climate change, we are going beyond the limits. So that's why I wonder if the best designation, the best name for our time is not Anthropocene, but Utopiacene. Why? Because the reason for this situation, for the hopes and also the fears we have as a society, are connected with technological utopian optimism. So 500 years ago started a new wave of utopian Western thought. We have utopias before Thomas More, before 1516. Plato, the Republic of Plato, is clearly a utopian book. However, there is a huge difference. The classical Greek and the pre-modern utopias were basically moral and political utopias. On the contrary, the utopias, the modern utopias, we are going to see some samples of that, are basically technological utopias. So by moral utopias, I mean utopias that state that we can shift the world by shifting our ethics and our political organization. So the way humans deal with one another. By technological utopias, I mean the belief that we may change the world by shifting the connections, the technological connections between humankind and nature. So we don't need to change ourselves. We need just to empower and to increase the technological power over nature. That's why, and there is a deep optimism. This is a Karl Marx sentence where he wrote, "Humanity only puts before himself tasks that humans are able to solve." This is a kind of religious belief, because it's a statement that you cannot prove unless you are in the end of history. And optimism tends to identify or to change the priorities of scientific agenda. I was always surprised by the fact that with all the great technological and scientific improvement of our modernity, we took so many years to measure the CO2 in the atmosphere. It's surprising, isn't it? So just in 1960, someone considered it important. And it was not a big science project. It was a PhD project. It was Mr. Charles Keeling doing his PhD. So because all the big companies, all the big governments were worried with other things. What is the problem of CO2 in the atmosphere? No problem at all. That's optimism. Basically, two of the main utopian thinkers are Tommaso Campanella and Francis Bacon, our great Francis Bacon. And they, in Città del Sole and also New Atlantis, we have two clear narratives in which they are eager for future, they are eager for technological progress, and they believe that science as technology is able to change history and the future of mankind in the world. But that was something that clearly became a trend, a global trend. That's why the young Auguste Comte, in 1822, wrote about the shift in history. So he said that now with the Industrial Revolution, with the new power of mankind over nature, we are entering in a new age of humanity. Il est possible de parvenir à des connaissances qui soient fort utiles à vie et ainsi nous rendre comme maîtres et possesseurs de la nature. This is Descartes, contemporary of Bacon. But later on, you can see in Auguste Comte the same idea. L'action sur la nature pour la modifier à l'avantage de l'homme. This is a program for the future. And this became a kind of ideology. So a new secular religion, the religion of the technological fix. And one of the things that, as a member of the scientific community, I consider myself as more critical is the losing the capacity that we in a certain way lost of being exercising self-criticism. For instance, we don't see so many times or so commonly writings about the limits of technology. For instance, Jaron Lanier wrote about a concept that I consider very important, the concept of complexity ceiling. So we can tell that in all areas of science and technology, there is the same limit or the same capacity to expand our knowledge and technological impacts of that. So we need to understand the limits of technology. We need, of course, technology, but we need also a critical vision of it. And we are now embarked in a process in which we are indeed the limit. We tend many times not to consider those things that worry us most, but there is a huge debate about transhumanism today. So we know that robotic is increasing. There is a great discussion in our colleagues of economy about what is going to happen to many jobs after with the robotic improvements that are coming right now. But there is a most profound discussion about a kind of a new breed of humankind, a combination of cybernetics with biology, cyborgs, and so on. This is on the stage. So it's a discussion that is being developed, and it's not just a discussion. It's not a speculation, like the speculation of Bernal in 1929. It's something that is clear, as we may see in Gregor's talk. Future generations will not want to remain natural if that means living at the whim of advanced creatures to whom they would be little more than intriguing relics from an abandoned human past. So this is something that should be part of our scientific research programs. To conclude this topic and to enter in my final part, just 2 slides to summarize the essential topics that I would like to convey to you. We live in this Utopia scene in a kind of blindness towards global commons. In many ways, we have the illusion of endless ecological space. We live in the belief of a technological fix, so a technological solution for every problems that arrive. We live in a society where there is a clear, sheer, greed-oriented action by strong interests groups, able to manipulate governments and media. You have the example of the American policy nowadays, in which strong interests were able to shift the federal government agenda. And the conviction, we live a conviction of being inside a zero-sum game. So instead of understanding that we are forced to cooperate, there is a trend to increase conflict in economy, in politics, in all the domains. What is the pattern? And why those disasters that I described occur? Because I think there is a pattern, and I would like to identify it in 4 stages. We have more technological power than political wisdom, vested interests, stronger than public interests. Linear causal planning instead of holistic approach. This is something that is, of course, familiar to you, because I'm sure that the schools of planning are trying to correct and to overcome this difficulty. Arrogance of the will and poor scientific understanding of complexity. That's something also very important. And finally, priority to short-term instead of long-term strategic vision. This is a problem that we know in our own professional activity. How do cities face this general utopia scene? So that's my second and final part. What do I mean by coming back to reality? We are speaking in a European, to an European public, in an European association. Let me just to show you a graphic slide. So this is 2 shipwrecks, the Titanic and La Méduse, a French ship that shipwrecked near Senegal in 1860. There is in the Louvre a painting from Guéricault about that. Probably the shipwreck of La Méduse is typically an example of the results, the tragic results of ill management. In the case I intend to explain, of ill political management. So bad government, bad governance. And I think that we have, regarding the future of Europe, we have to solve the still going on crisis of the monetary union, of the Eurozone. And I hope that we are able to avoid both shipwrecks, both the Titanic or La Méduse. But I think that if there is a shipwreck, it will be of the La Méduse type. Coming to the main issue of this conference, cities are facing a crisis that combine dimensions of the 2 major crises in the last 100 years. So if we compare the 1924 crisis, the Great Depression crisis, with the economic crisis that started in 2008, we understand clearly a big difference. I'm quoting for the first part, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt inaugural speech in 1933, when he was inaugurated as president for the first time. And as you may see, he speaks of something that is a hope, nature. He wrote and he said that nature still offers her bounty. I listened to this speech, the second one, from Mr. Anot Tong, the president of the Kiribati Republic in New Delhi, in a conference, and he started the speech saying, "My country is going to disappear underwater." That's the big difference. We have the features of an economic and financial crisis, but at the same time, we have a new crisis, an ontological crisis, a crisis of the environment and nature. So cities, and of course the world, globally speaking, but cities and cities' governments need to face those 2 challenges. I think that the main crisis of our period is an environmental crisis. And I don't consider climate change as separated from the environmental crisis. And I'm proposing in many years ago, I started proposing a kind of description of the main features of that crisis. So it's a planetary dimension crisis. There is an irreversibility and entropy. The case of biodiversity extinction is a case. There is a cumulative acceleration in time, the example of the ocean's decline. There is also growing political and social unrest, and it's a kind of, using the metaphor of the debt, finance debt, we have an ontological debt. So we are giving to next generations, putting in the hands of the future generations a debt that must be paid because it's an ontological debt, it's not a financial debt. And why are cities so important? Well, to put it in the short period I have to speak, I go back to a lost and forgotten German writer and philosopher, Oswald Spengler, who wrote after, in the end of the First World War, wrote a fantastic book, The Decadence of the West, Der Untergang des Abendlandes. And it was a philosophy of history. In those days, philosophers were able to speak about history as a whole. And in that vision, in that Weltanschauung, in that vision of the world, Spengler gave to the cities, a major role. Why? Because for him, for Spengler, cities are the symbols of civilization. Being civilization, the mature stage of a culture. So he tried in that book to establish a kind of comparative approach between major cultures, and the final stage is a urban stage. So for him, for Spengler, the appearance of great metropolis is an example of maturity, but is also a risk of near death, because he considered cultures as organisms, living beings, okay? And it's interesting to see, coming back to Europe again, Rome had over 1 million inhabitants during 3.5 centuries. So starting by the end of the Republic until the 300 and something. Over 1 million inhabitants. Do you know how many centuries were needed to have a new metropolis with more than 1 million inhabitants in Europe? It took 1,500 years. It was in the start of the 19th century, London. So Rome and London, 1,500 years in separation. So that's why what is going to happen to cities will be a good symptom of our capacity of overcoming the challenges or being destroyed by them. Well, I want to give some hopeful perspective, because I think we need to have it, and there is an objective ground for that. Ulrich Beck, a great German sociologist that died in the start of the year 2015, it's a great loss for science. Ulrich Beck, a man that introduced the concept of risk society and was always understanding the technological risks. One of the last causes he fought for was the need for cities to take a part as a key actor in facing the great challenges, namely the climate change challenge. So we wrote in a conference to the London School of Economics, in an interview, climate change is not only a catastrophe, it is the anticipation of catastrophe. And it is this anticipation which forces people to take action. It is the anticipation of catastrophe that empowers the mobilization of people and resources. In this sense, it is a mobilizing force and a source for the legitimation of political power. So I think this is it's an hopeful tone, but it's also a very mobilizing tone, because we need to do something in order to avoid the risk of catastrophe. And I propose to you a clear distinction between two categories. Crisis is not collapse, okay? It's not a synonym. Crisis is also a challenge for personal or collective growth, for human or institutional improvement. Crisis is very important for cities to grow. Collapse, on the opposite, brings individuals or societies to a paralysis, implies structural destruction in production and the recording of information. Crisis brings pain and hope. Collapse brings pain and oblivion. So, what happened to Rome was a collapse, it was not a crisis. There is not a crisis of the Roman Empire. There was a collapse of the Roman Empire. So cities will have a major role in avoiding a collapse of contemporary world civilization. And for that, we have key public policies, agriculture and food production, that will be tackled also in cities, also in a new concept of metropolis, agriculture and food production, energy, sustainable production and security, sustainable mobility, urban social cohesion, yes, that has many with the topic of this conference, nature and biodiversity conservation, water protection management, and also I think that cities are very important to the shaping of the new international system we need. I'm going to introduce you probably a new concept, the concept of compulsory cooperation. I think that cities may be ahead of governments in the idea that we need to cooperate. We need to overcome boundaries and to produce economy of scale in our strategic commitments. We have an agenda for urban and global compulsory cooperation. Climate change, globalization, and global inequality, they are not just matters for governments, they are matters for and issues for cities. Cities are going to face the risk of an unexpected speed increase, for instance, in the sea level rise. This is a problem because we are underestimating the cryosphere depletion. So probably some things, the cryosphere depletion will occur in a speedy way than expected. Globalization, global inequality, a part of the refugees crisis has something to do with that, a part, not the whole picture, of course. That's why I and a group of colleagues from 7 countries proposed last year in a book called SOS Treaty, the Safe Operating Space Treaty, a new approach to managing our use of the Earth system. We tried to propose a new concept for international relations in which, of course, cities are major actors. This is the book, just to give you the graphic vision of the article, and the basic concept is the idea of SOS Treaty. What do we intend with the book? Basically, to show that the current international system, dominated by the concept of national states, national boundaries, by the concept of separation, by the concept that walls can protect ourselves. There is a dominance of walls being built everywhere. This is a great mistake. We don't need walls because global commons don't work by walls. They work in a flux of energy. They work in streams. And the book tries to tackle, not just in a scientific way, but also in a legal way, how can we encourage international society to give a prize and also to give a reward to countries, into regions, into cities that are able to respect global commons. But this would be the topic for another conference. I'm near the end, and I'm trying to use 30 minutes, not 40 minutes, because we started a little late. I think that we need technology, we need science more than ever, but we need also a prudential approach. An Australian colleague, Thomas Homer Dixon, a Canadian colleague, Thomas Homer Dixon, created this concept, the ingenuity gap. And I think he is a good example of the current status of situation, of the world situation. There is a kind of race, And there are two runners. The first runner is called problems. The second runner is called solutions. The run is not over. We are still running. However, we need to be humble enough to understand that the problems are ahead of us, of the solutions. And it's not by mixing good science with propaganda, with marketing, that we are going to overcome the problem. So we need to be humble enough to understand that, as Dixon said, and into many critical places and on too many critical issues, we are losing the race. The race is not lost, but we need to give ourselves more impetus, more serenity, more hard labor if we want to overcome the race. And my last slide, Mahatma Gandhi, it's always welcome on account of the wisdom. I think that we need to give ourselves time to reflect and to take good decisions. Sometimes, even in our individual life, I think this advice from Gandhi is very useful. Speed is irrelevant if you are going on the wrong direction. Thank you very much.